Hello, colleagues. In our line of work, we know that a calm monitor doesn't always mean a calm patient. Today, we're taking a hard look at one of the most sudden and serious crises we manage, postpartum hemorrhage.
So, let's start with a critical question. What do you do when your patient is losing a catastrophic amount of blood, but the classic signs you're trained to look for, tachycardia, hypotension, haven't shown up yet? That's the dangerous reality of PPH, and it's why our clinical suspicion has to be razor sharp. Welcome to the Dr. Mech Anesthesiology series. Now, just a quick disclaimer. This is for educational purposes and is never a substitute for your own clinical judgment. All the information we're covering today is grounded in the excellent review on postpartum hemorrhage from Open Anesthesia. All right, so to really get a handle on this, we first need to define the problem and understand its scale. The clinical definition we're working with for PPH is pretty clear. It's a blood loss of at least 1,000 milliliters and, this is key, it's accompanied by signs or symptoms of hypovolemia. This all happens within that first 24 hours postpartum. It's a clear line in the sand for us to act.
And why is this so critical? Well, look at this number, 70,000. That is the estimated number of mothers who die every single year from PPH. It is still the leading cause of maternal mortality worldwide. The stakes just couldn't be higher. This brings us right back to that initial troubling question. A healthy patient can lose more than a quarter of her blood volume before her heart rate and blood pressure even begin to change. That's a huge physiological delay. It means we can't afford to wait for the monitors to tell us there's a problem. We have to be ahead of it.
Okay, so when hemorrhage is happening, how do we think through the cause systematically and, more importantly, quickly? We use the 4 T's. This is our go-to framework for rapid diagnosis right at the bedside. This chart really tells the story. You can see that the overwhelming majority of cases, somewhere between 70 and 80%, come down to one thing: uterine tone. Let's break down each of the T's, starting with that big one. So the first T, tone, refers to uterine atony. This is when the uterus just fails to contract down after the baby is delivered. You need that muscle to clamp down hard to constrict all those open blood vessels. If it stays soft and boggy, those vessels can bleed without any control. And who's at risk? Well, we're looking for things like an overdistended uterus from a multiple gestation or a fatigued uterus from a really long labor. Infection is another big one. But for us, it's absolutely crucial to remember that our own volatile anesthetics can relax the uterus and directly contribute to atony. The second T is trauma. Pretty straightforward, this is about physical injury. We're talking about lacerations to the cervix or vagina, or in a worst-case scenario, a complete uterine rupture. The risks here include things like an operative vaginal delivery or a very fast precipitous labor. But the major red flag for us as anesthesiologists is a prior uterine incision. Knowing a patient has had a prior C-section changes our entire game plan and our readiness for a major hemorrhage. Our third T is tissue. This means there's something left inside the uterus that shouldn't be there, either fragments of the placenta or something far more dangerous like a placenta accreta, where it's grown into the uterine wall. That retained tissue physically blocks the uterus from contracting. Again, prior uterine surgery and a placenta previa are huge risk factors. We're seeing a really alarming rise in placenta accreta that directly correlates with the number of previous C-sections a patient has had. That history is a critical piece of intel for our preoperative assessment. And that brings us to our fourth and final T, thrombin. This is all about coagulopathy, any problem with the blood's ability to form a clot. Now, this can be triggered by things like placental abruption or an amniotic fluid embolism. But here's the vicious cycle we have to understand. Massive bleeding itself causes coagulopathy. The body burns through all of its clotting factors trying to stop the bleeding, which of course just makes the bleeding worse. We have to interrupt that cycle, and fast. So we've identified the potential causes. Now let's talk about our immediate response, the protocols for management and resuscitation. You know, the best hemorrhage to manage is the one that never happens. And that's the whole point of actively managing the third stage of labor. This simple bundle, giving prophylactic oxytocin, uterine massage, and controlled cord traction, is our first and best line of defense. The second PPH is on your radar, you need to be thinking about tranexamic acid, or TXA. Major studies have shown that giving 1 gram of TXA early saves lives. This isn't a drug to wait and see on. It needs to be a priority, first-line intervention. This is where we shine. Our immediate actions are critical. We need to secure large bore IV access, send off a full set of labs including coags and a fibrinogen level, and, most importantly, we cannot hesitate to activate the massive transfusion protocol. Making that call early is one of the single most important things we can do.
So what happens when the initial measures aren't working? We have to be ready to escalate care. This moves us into procedural and surgical options. Just a reminder, you are listening to the Dr. MEK series. The goal here is to try and spare the uterus if at all possible. This can involve things like a Bacri balloon for tamponade, uterine artery embolization by interventional radiology, or surgical techniques like a B-Lynch suture. Our job through all of this is to aggressively resuscitate and keep the patient stable enough for these interventions to work, and if they don't, the definitive treatment is a peripartum hysterectomy. I want to end with this quote from the source material because it's so important. Most adverse outcomes in hemorrhage are likely preventable. This isn't about blame. It's a powerful call to action. It tells us that failures often happen early on by missing risk factors, underestimating blood loss, and delaying resuscitation. So the question I'll leave you with is this. When you go back to your own unit, ask yourself, is our team's hemorrhage protocol truly optimized for that critical first hour? Our preparation and our decisive actions are what make the difference. Thank you for your time. For more deep dives into critical topics in our field, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Stay safe.